Welcome to What Do You Understand, brought to you by Global Partners for Development. I'm your host, Ria Pullen, and together we'll explore the world of philanthropy and development, confronting global disparities and the impacts of our collective efforts. Joining me is my co-host, Daniel Casanova, the Executive Director of Global Partners for Development. So, are you ready to question what you understand? Let's dive right in. We're thrilled to welcome our guest today, Owen Gaffney, an esteemed sustainability writer, analyst, and strategist. Owen co-authored the visionary book Earth for All, A Survival Guide for Humanity, which serves as a roadmap to global prosperity within our planetary boundaries. Using state-of-the-art computer modeling, Earth for All presents transformative steps to a sustainable future by 2050, advocating for a reimagined global economic system that works for both people and the planet. Stay tuned as we unpack the transformative insights of Earth for All in an enlightening conversation with Owen Gaffney. So I actually want to start with Owen. Daniel told me, he's like, there's this new book out. It's called Earth for All. You have to read it. I'm buying it for you tomorrow and you need to read it. And I was like, okay. And then we got into it and I was like, Daniel, this is a really important book. So we've been just big fans, just because of the kind of the work we do is kind of addresses kind of these things. And he's talked to me a lot about what we need to do to move humanity forward. And these were all the points. He's like, this is it. This is the answer. So I kind of just want to talk to you about the evolutions. How did this come about?
Okay, well, it's great to be. I mean, the origin story for this is really, well, we have to go back 50
Let's go back
years to 1972.
Yeah.
And this organization called the Club of Rome commissioned this report called Limits to Growth. And that report was a pretty historic landmark report. It was the first time we'd really got computer models to really look at the whole planet. It's like what's going to happen with the economy, what's going to happen with population, what's going to happen with resource use, and what's going to happen to with pollution and things like that. And really, really big, broad strokes. And they built this really sort of system dynamics model, a complex model for the first time to look at that. And they created a bunch of scenarios. And some of those scenarios said, well, if we continue as we are on this exponential journey, things are not going to go well. Everybody will, have, we'll have more food, we'll have more wealth in the world, etc. But we live on a finite planet. And so if you live on a finite planet and you've got exponential growth, at some point you're going to hit the walls, you're going to hit the boundaries. And they said, well, if we continue on this particular really negative scenario, then we could hit the boundaries sometime in the 21st century, maybe a few decades from now. And if you look at that scenario they created and that picture they created and the graphs and the lines there, that's the scenario we followed. And so then we started looking at, well, okay, so what happens now? And one of them, Jürgen Randers, is still working as a modeler. He's now in his 70s and he's absolutely incredible figure, like this father figure in this system dynamics models. And we started talking to him about doing an update and creating a new model, which we called Earth for All. And in fact, it was called the Earth for model. And then we turned the project into Earth for All. And that was a new model to explore what's going to happen this century, essentially.
Interesting. So you said that was started in 1972 and tracked from then. 20 years from then, or
well, the model. So the team that built the model, they produced the report. They published the report. It got a lot of attention over the intervening years. I mean, immediately it was completely challenged. What do you mean there are limits to growth? I mean, there cannot be limits to growth. And Ronald Reagan, a few years later, he says, there's no limits to growth because there's no limits to human imagination and human innovation. And he's right, actually. But there are limits to growth. We live on a planet.
And the planet, there's limits in the planet.
Yeah.
That's what you call the planetary boundaries, right?
Yeah.
So one of the big updates, I suppose, since 72 is in 2009, a research paper was published on planetary boundaries, a safe operating space for Humanity by one of Johan Rockström, one of the authors on the book, on the Stockholm Resilience Centre, and I used to be part of the Resilience Centre. So that planetary boundaries framework was really it was a huge moment for Earth system science and for sustainability science, because before we had the planetary boundaries framework, the scientific community was saying, well, we have this, we have climate change, we have biodiversity, we have pollution, we have water, we have a huge range of issues, and they're all interconnected. And we'd be telling policymakers that, and policymakers would just be looking at us going, okay, everything is right, everything's just interconnected, and we'd just be nodding, yes, everything's interconnected, and it's everything, everywhere, all at once. And you were like, yeah. And they're going, okay, but we can't really do anything.
Yeah.
And then the boundaries framework came out and said, okay, everything is connected, but there's 9 things we really, really need to worry about. Really, and it's those 9 planetary boundaries. That's the critical thing. And, at that point, we'd gone beyond 3 of those boundaries. And in fact, since that paper came out, we've now analyzed all the boundaries, and we can see that we've gone beyond 6 of the boundaries now.
Yeah.
So we're really...
And we're getting close to the other ones.
Yeah, that's right. So
yeah.
we're really... that's right. So we're in the danger zone where we risk very severe consequences for humanity. With climate change, we risk tipping points, and that's very apparent now. We're getting more and more data on the scale of risk with tipping points and how close they are. So so that's
hard for people to understand. It's hard to make that tangible, right? I mean, especially for people in our economic class. I think it's hard to see it, right? Like it's going to be like it's there, I think, right? Like as you address like how poverty is so significant in terms of needing to address that to mitigate these like most awful scenarios. But it's like, I think it's hard for people to understand. Like it's hard for people to feel connected to the direness of it. Like, yeah, I think so. I mean, and it's almost like, a frog or a lobster in a pot of boiling water, or Schrodinger's cat.
Harder and harder and harder. And you don't really, it until it's too late. And I think, with tipping points, for example, climate tipping points, we're now coming very close to losing the West Antarctic ice sheet, the Greenland ice sheet, and Arctic sea ice, for example, in summer. But, scientifically, we probably won't know 100% that we've crossed those tipping points until like a few decades after we've crossed them, So that's one of for me, that's one of the biggest challenges with science communication. People say, oh, you can't be certain. No, we can't be certain until it's actually happened, but then it's too late.
Yeah.
Like there's no going back on sort of human timescales. That's it. For hundreds, thousands of years, we're just going to lose them. They've gone beyond the point of no return. And that means, ultimately a sea level rise of 10 meters, 30 feet within a few centuries, which will have big consequences for New York. It'll have big consequences for Los Angeles, San Francisco, for New Orleans. All these places in the US have got, and even so, even with the state of Florida, people say, oh, well, we'll just build some walls in higher and higher. And it's like, well, no, you're built on porous limestone.
Yeah. Occasionally, there's going to be a sinkhole that swallows your apartment complex.
Yeah, if you're living in a porous limestone, the water just comes up regardless of. So, and then in the developed world, that's obviously a big thing that we might be able to adapt to, but it'll mean deserting some places you just cannot afford to keep.
Yes.
But in the developing world, in places like Jakarta, which have already sank several meters in the last few decades, the rising seas are going to have a huge impact in China, in India, across Africa, etc. It's going to be even more devastating. But that's just one, and that's just one of the issues and that we're dealing with. And then, so in the book, this is what one of them. We kind of joke that in 1972, when they had basic system dynamics models, at least they had it easy in that the planet was still operating in the same way. But although we know that this century, because we looked, what's going to happen between now and the end of the century, we know that we're going through some big transition points. So that makes it even more difficult to create scenarios or any sort of predictions on what happens if we go beyond those tipping points on climate change. What's going to happen when it comes to migration, for example, or
how do you deal with like 100 million displaced people? somewhere like in the Indian subcontinent or something like that, like Bangladesh or anywhere like that. Like we don't know, the world doesn't know what like the impact of what that would be.
Yeah, but even those numbers, I mean, we could say that, it could be an order of 10 worse than that, like 1 billion people to 3 billion people, because, on Earth, we have like, there's a human climate niche, there's a climate range that we're perfectly adapted to. And beyond that climate range, we're not adapted to, we just can't function. And beyond that climate range on Earth is a very small area right now. It's little bits of the Sahara Desert and the Arabian Peninsula and places with very, very low population densities. So they're the uninhabitable areas of Earth, literally, for all intents and purposes, uninhabitable. Those areas are going to expand, and it's going to create a band of uninhabitable places around the planet. And within that uninhabitable places, we have places like India and Pakistan. And so, with literally billions of people. So these are the kind of risks we're facing. And what will happen there? Will people be able to adapt? Will people migrate? What's going to happen? So this is part of the risk. I mean, we're not going to get rid of that risk, but we can significantly reduce that risk if we can reduce emissions very, very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
Man, how do you not cry all the time when you're talking about? I'm sure you have this is hard. I mean, like we talk about lots of depressing things in our work, but like, how do you? I mean, like, right? It's like you're talking about this all the time. So yeah,
it is. I mean, it's really tough. And I think for me, one of the biggest shocks in my career, it was when myself and some of the co-authors here, we published a paper on tipping points back in 2019, and we identified that that a lot of the tipping points we've been talking about 10 years beforehand. So we'd been making predictions. Well, okay, maybe by 2050, 2060, maybe by 2070, we might be coming closer to those tipping points. So we did an analysis again of where do we stand with them. And as we looked around the 16 main tipping points on Earth, we could find 9 of them are already destabilizing right now, and that they're already going through unprecedented changes. So we don't know if they've crossed tipping points yet. But what we can say is that 10 years ago, they didn't show signs of this scale of change, and now they are. But, but I'm reasonably optimistic. I'm quite an optimistic person, and disproportionately, I think, scientists, artists, designers, entrepreneurs, others who are creating the future, they tend to be optimistic about creating a better future, a more hopeful future. And I do think there's still time to make some big changes. I think we're now living, today on Earth, it's the best time on Earth to have lived. I mean, we have a better quality of life. We have, greater longevity. We have better health. We have better job prospects, etc., than at any time in history. So this is a great time to be alive, and it's and looking out into the future.
You're reading Hans Hapsling. Hans Rosling. Yeah, you're. Yeah, it's good. We brought a sword for you to swallow after this. Oh. No, sorry.
Actually, I'm not even sure you're joking.
Oh, well, yeah. And so how did you get all of these experts to come together to create this book? Because, these are all people from different areas of expertise. Did you call up your friend and were like, needs to be here? I want to know, because there's quite a few, authors in here, people who like their expertise. How did you get it into one concise, which
one of them is the hardest to work with? No, sorry.
So I guess it's a coalition of the willing, people who really, really like, and so, the Stockholm Resilience Centre is a place of transdisciplinary working. It brings together people who love working across the boundaries of science and into policy and into business, and but across the boundaries, from biodiversity to economics, from ecology to engineering, etc. So, I mean, that as a hub, the Resilience Centre is just this attractor for people. And what I found in working in science now for 20 years is that most scientists don't operate or think like that. most scientists are just completely in their silos.
Yeah,
I don't think they like the idea of maybe collaborating with others, but when it actually happens, they go, "Nah, don't like it. That's not working." And so, but there are a small group of people who just love that collaboration, who are working right at the edges of knowledge. So I guess we have an ecosystem of people like that. The Club of Rome is, as I mentioned earlier, who created the original limits to growth. Like, there must be the world's biggest and best network of systems thinkers. So we brought together, so there's 6 main authors, but in fact it's the work of hundreds of people, really. And what we did was brought together a Transformational Economics Commission. So what we wanted to do is like, okay, who are the leading economists who are thinking way outside of the box, who are thinking way beyond the current neoliberal paradigm and thinking, where do we need to go? Can we get them together? And we had the modelers, and with Jürgen Randers and others, and Per Espen Stoknes. How do we create a model that's really doing something different? And then so we had these 2 groups, and then we'd have like a scenario, and we'd test it on one group, and then we'd put it into the model, and the model would come out with stuff, and then we go to the economists, and they'd go, "No, we don't like that. That's not really realistic." And then we change things, and then we back. So we had like this kind of circle of like feedback loops of ideas to just really test our thinking and go, "No, that's not going to work," or "This is going to work." Because the thing is, what we're trying to do is like, you can say, "Okay, we're going to create, we're going to take away debt in the developing world, or we're going to have progressive taxation here, or we're going to invest in health here," or something. But what will that happen? What will happen at the global scale when you're talking about 8 billion people? Like,
but who are these jerks and institutions in like the U.S. government that want to like keep debt for like the developing world, right? I mean, like who, like why is it that we can maintain that? Like, how is it there are institutions that can? I get that like there's like bigger implications about forgiving it and stuff like that, but ultimately it's like, who are the people that are like, "Oh no, we don't want to figure out a way to like get rid of that"?
There's one issue. If what would debt cancellation do though? I mean, at a global scale, would it be a big enough change to deal with some of the problems, or would it be reasonably small? And it turns out it's a big deal. And it's an even bigger deal now. When we wrote the book, we didn't have the inflation in the world that we do now. Obviously, with inflation and then interest rates going up, so the cost of borrowing is very, very high now, and that has a big impact on borrowing in the developing world. And they can't afford to even though solar power is like the best form of power and cheapest form of power, they still can't borrow at rates that they can afford. Here in the US, if you're building a solar station outside of New York, you might be able to borrow at 4%, 5% interest rates. If you're in Indonesia, you're going to be paying 12%, and it's just like, why?
Right.
Everyone, you need electricity in New York, you need electricity in Jakarta. Everyone's got the money to pay for it. What difference does it make? No, can't be done. So we need and debt would have a big impact there. If you can take away debts, that gives more buying power for these technologies.
And then the 5 turnarounds, was that something once you had all of the modeling, all of that, when you guys made that concise 5 turnarounds, which is ending poverty, inequality, and then empowering women, food, and energy.
Yes.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Pisces.
Okay, so what we were looking for was like a kind of minimum viable product. What's the absolute, in terms of transformations, there could be 200, there could be 300 transformations, but what would be the absolute minimum to drive, to have a good quality of life, to have well-being for all people within planetary boundaries. And it dropped out as those 5. I mean, obviously we need to change our energy system, number one, if we're going to stabilize the climate. And when it comes to the environment, the biggest impact on land and the oceans is our food use. So we need to change our food use. I mean, those 2 things are obvious. The others, I mean, so when it comes to poverty and inequality, I mean, those two things need to be addressed, because we need to have, if we're going to have well-being for all, people, those in extreme poverty, need to come out of extreme poverty. So we need to raise their GDP to at least $15,000 a year. But what we found out is that they're beyond $15,000 a year or so, you don't really have much money gains. You don't see it's kind of your well-being. Yeah, exactly. Your well-being plateaus. You kind of you're getting richer and richer, but you don't actually have any more benefits in many countries. It's fairly negligible. So we need to end poverty for everybody to have well. But then on inequality, I mean, not only ethically is it just if the world's first trillionaire will be a failure for humanity. It's like that's not a success story.
We can't let people.
Yeah, I mean, and billionaires are a failure for humanity. I mean, this is not a success story. Nobody needs $1 billion. It's all about status, and when you get to billions or tens of billions or hundreds of billions and everything, it's not about the money. It's about your status, because we are, comparison machines. Our, super skill is comparing one person to another. And if so the wealthier you are, you're always going to see, right, I need to be wealthier than that. So you've got this complete arms race, and wealth is just completely linked to your carbon emissions. The wealthier you are, the bigger carbon footprint you've got. You're not necessarily happier. You're not necessarily more secure. In terms of economic security, if you're very wealthy but living in a crime-ridden country, you don't feel particularly economically secure either. So I mean, so there's lots and lots of problems there. So we argue that dealing with inequality, not creating perfect equality, but reducing inequality to a tolerable level, and we can see what's tolerable. Places in Northern Europe, in Scandinavia, etc., where much more equal societies, but not far from being perfectly equal. These are still very capitalist societies, but they function very well. There's a lot of trust in government, and you need trust in government to take long-term decisions. If you're going to make a decision that goes from across generations, across this century, which what we need to do with food and land and poverty and energy, you have to have trust in the governments to do that. Only governments can take those really big long-term decisions, and we just argue you cannot do that without greater equality. That's a foundation for trust. And then finally, and this is a long answer, on gender empowerment, and that's just absolutely critical. Again, this is about functioning societies, and I can guarantee that men cannot take any credit or can take all responsibility for the patriarchal society we have right now, and driving the planet past planetary boundaries. So a more equal, more just in terms of gender empowerment will have a disproportionate impact on creating functional societies, for creating societal cohesion. And we need that sort of social cohesion if we're going to make it through here.
And I was asking Daniel, I was like, well, as a citizen fund, which I think would address the poverty side of it, do you think that's possible? Like, could he's like, oh, no, there's too many jerk faces there. It's floppy guys. No.
See, and that's the one treatment. And we've had this criticism in Sweden. It's like, oh, it can't be possible. They live in a dream world if they think we can have like a universal basic income or universal basic dividend. And then we say, well, what happened in Alaska? In the 1970s, a Republican Party decided that they would have a essentially universal basic income coming from a global commons. They would take money from the oil companies as a tax from the oil companies, and instead of putting the tax into the government, they'd put it into a fund, and that would be shared equally among every single adult in Alaska. And it, on average, gives out about $1,300 every year. under Sarah Palin, it gave out $3,400. You would not be able to take that universal basic dividend. It's essentially what it is. Back, it's so popular, you wouldn't be able to get rid of it. And what we argue, and we do some calculations, is that you could, that's for oil. But what about for polluting the atmosphere? What about for mining? What about the public goods like the financial infrastructure and the our information infrastructure, where we give a lot of our data away to Facebook and things like that? If that was to go into a fund, how much potentially could you get? And the numbers are between $5,000 and $12,000 a year, which is like a quite a game changing amount. And we argue that this century things are not looking good if we just continue as we are. This will be disastrous for humanity. Okay, that's going to be disruptive. This is not good. We don't want to go there. But we want to transform the economy. Then we need economic systems change. We need to change the whole energy system, the foundation of the global economy. We need to change within a generation, and we need to change the entire food system. That's going to be disruptive. How do we help people? How do we bring that trust and social cohesion? How do we bring everybody on this journey? And we say progressive taxations and a universal basic dividend will help. That universal basic dividend will provide a safety net for people as that transformation is happening. So if you work in a coal industry and you find out, I'm losing my job, but the government's investing in me, and now I've got this universal basic dividend, I could go back and retrain. I could retrain in something else, or I could go to university potentially, or, I've got $12,000. I could set up a business. I could become an entrepreneur. Maybe I should start buying some solar panels and start, working out how to put them on roofs and, create a new industry. So we need that as a safety net, but it's not just a safety net. I think it's also like an innovation net.
It's opportunity.
Yeah, innovate opportunity. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, I have two. I want to keep us concise. So so earlier when you're talking, I was saying what's impressive about what you guys are trying to do is that for me, things are really complex, right? So Malthus, for example, is where everyone's going to starve to death. We've reached this, once we reach this thing, and then he was super wrong, right? So, because he didn't account for agricultural innovation and whatever, and so we can produce more things, right? So there's I think we live in a space where people are optimistic about innovation. I think we're overly optimistic. I joke a lot about in our work, I'm there's this soccer ball and it's amazing. When kids in Africa, you go to poor communities, they'll kick it and it'll make, it'll be a generator and it gives them light. And then it's got seeds planted in it. They're aerates their dry land. And when they score goals, $100 bills fly out of it. But but I think we overly fixate on that. But something that's interesting when I think about it is I think things are really, really complex. You were talking about academia in the sense of people stay in their lane, right? And they're hyper focused. And it's the nature of the way we write in academia and peer reviewed things forces people to do that more and more and more. And it's really easy to hyper focus because you really need to just study this one, this is your field, right? But in trying to deal with this behemoth of a problem, I think there's not anyone that really understands all the complex systems, right? There's so much things that are happening, so I'm complimenting you. In this, it feels to me I can get a grasp of okay, maybe this has been simplified enough to be able to figure out how do you make that next step to do it, right? And that was what you did. But my question to you would be is there this Malthian problem there where maybe you got maybe you're just Chicken Little, right? Running around saying the sky's falling, right? And ultimately, there's an innovation that's just going to fix it all. Maybe it's AI, right? Maybe they use these models, 50 years ago, they used computer models to do this. And maybe tomorrow, AI is going to be dudes, you guys are dumb. All you had to do was this. No, I'm setting you up a little bit, but
without doubt. But we do know number one, limits to growth in 72 actually just got it looked this is a lot in the media talks about it predicted social collapse in the 21st century, society would collapse, etc. It'd be just a complete crash, that was one of the scenarios. It looked at multiple scenarios. But actually now the problem is the scenario that we followed most closely up to that point is that one. Okay. So it's the number one. So researchers, we don't just look at single scenarios and we don't just say, oh, this is what's going to happen. What we try to do is look at multiple scenarios and go, okay, so, well, if this happens, because there's so much uncertainty. So often, in climate research, we'd look at dozens and dozens. In the book, though, we just look at two scenarios just to try to keep it really simple. The business as usual, and the giant leap. How do we? Is it what we wanted to ask? Is is it possible even for this population, this size, 9-10 billion people eventually, to live a good life on planet Earth? And so that on that scenario, we can say, it's to the best of our knowledge, it looks like we can. Electric cars are a solution, but we can't all drive around in SUVs. I mean, that's just not going to go. We need mass transit systems that are efficient, and definitely smaller cars. But then the other thing about the prediction, I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, on a year to year to year to year thing, it's really, really difficult. When the pandemic hits, a financial crisis hits, what's the next, a war in Ukraine, with Russia, etc. These things are very, very difficult to predict. So why should anybody have faith in models able to look at these things? But some things, we can watch the trends just change over time. Like poverty has just come down and down and down and down and down and down and down. Throughout all of this, through the collapse of the Soviet Union, through the global financial crisis, etc., we've made inroads on that. That's one of the reasons I'm optimistic. We can keep going on that. With greenhouse gas emissions, the other side of things, we can make all these models and things, but we can actually see, a lot of the models from decades ago show it's going up and up and up, because we know it's just related to economic growth. And as the economy grows, then we can easily then map that to what will happen with CO2 emissions. And with population, we're very, very good at predicting population, and have been now for many decades. The UN Population Statistics Division is excellent, because these things, births and deaths and longevity, etc., how that's changing. We can see the patterns, and we can imagine how they move out into the future.
I would love to take this so far back, because I always want to know why. Like, why is this your life's work? Like, when you were a boy, did you? Like, I have a 6-year-old who loves science, and so I don't know, at 6, if he thinks he's going to be, doing something you're doing, it's in your background from when you were a child, when did you know you wanted to do this kind of field of work? What was your a quick version of your past?
Okay. Well, actually, the quick version is fairly. I remember NASA published an image, satellite image of the Earth at night. For the first time it did this composite image of hundreds of photographs of Earth at night to put it together, and it was that image just stuck in my head when I saw it as a teenager. It was that was the Anthropocene. This is humanity's footprint on Earth, and I was just completely amazed, because until that point, a lot of the astronauts and NASA and co had talked about how fragile Earth was, how beautiful it was, and how humanity, you could barely notice. It was just all this beauty, this bubble, this floating ball in space, this biosphere. But humanity, we're just kind of totally inconsequential. And then, it's this sort of big reveal when you see Earth at night. It's oh my God, it's you've got everything on there. You've got the eastern seaboard of the US, western seaboard, lit up Christmas trees. You've got the gas flares in Saudi Arabia and everything. You've even got Japanese fishing fleets shining lights down onto the surface of the ocean to draw fish up and into the nets and everything. So and the across Russia you can see the Trans-Siberian Railroad and everything. So every part of humanity is just like lit up, and it's just everywhere, And so when I saw that, I was like, okay. I kind of thought, what at that time, I just want to live a life where I do no harm, and that's virtually impossible. But then I did start thinking, well, how can I do something more positive? How can I try to understand that? So I do see. I studied then astronautic engineering. I was interested in satellite design, maybe being a space astronaut or something like that. But I changed course there as well because I felt a lot of people in that space on my degree course just moved into the defense industry. The big opportunities were in defense industry. And I was like, I don't want to be part of the defense industry. And then just moved into, Earth system science and, system dynamics. So it's been, an interesting ride.
All right. So you touched on this a lot as we talked, which is so about, we talk like certainty and uncertainty, but like to put you on the spot in this is be like, if you could capture in a more like short few sentences, like what is the thing that you understand that you feel most certain about that you would want to share with people that you could, when you meet a guy in a diner and you're like, I know this thing really well and I can tell you about it. What's that thing?
Okay. Well,
yeah.
That's a good question because a lot of what I do is looking out into future scenarios, and so it's very, very difficult to be very certain about things, and we have to be sort of we have to use language very carefully and cautiously on that, which is not what you want.
No, your answer is like I can't be certain about anything.
And I'm sure some scientists will say they can't be certain about anything, but I really can't. They could be a little bit more certain, but when you're looking at the future, it is more difficult. I think personally, I think with climate tipping points, they're the things that really worry me more than anything. I think as the evidence mounts, it's clearer that we are much closer to climate tipping points than we thought 10 years ago, and that's extremely concerning. But even with the science of tipping points is just so complex that I said earlier, we probably won't know we've crossed them. We can't be certain until we've actually crossed them. So that
and that's terrifying.
Yeah.
No, yeah,
absolutely. And a couple of other things I suppose in the book were uncertainty. So one interesting thing we included in the model was a social tension index and a well-being index. And to the best of my knowledge, they haven't been included in these global models before. And I'm not going to say they're perfect. They need a lot of improvements and things. But I do think social tensions will increase in the world. And I think we can be certain about that because the economic system hasn't changed. And if the economic system is going to drive us to have more billionaires and eventually a trillionaire, if we stay in that system, then we can expect more social tension because democracies can't survive with this sort of level of inequality. So I feel very certain about that. I feel very confident that we need economic systems transformation, that inequality is an absolute foundation for that we need to bring everybody on this journey, and they won't come on this journey unless everybody sees something in it for them, and they see that everybody's in it together, that we're all working together. So I feel certain about that.
It sounds like you're optimistic though, and that's what gives me a little hope that you're optimistic.
I'm really, really optimistic. I have two kids. They're just the bright teenagers, really engaged in science as well, and really engaged in art and football and everything. And we talk about these issues all the time, and they're optimistic because they feel, we got this. You guys fail, we'll sort it out. Which is good. And I feel optimistic because of the young people, because of the young movement, people like Greta and the youth movements have created a completely new energy here. I see a lot of countries talking about becoming well-being economies. And I can see that transformation can happen really, really fast. I think the energy transformation is going to happen much, much faster than most people predict. And you can see that, in Norway, it's like,
because people are going to make money doing it, so it's just inevitable.
That's right. So it's going to be profitable. Increasingly, more and more people see that the sustainable solution is the cheapest solution, and it's miles better than the old solutions. So those two things are sort of unbelievable combinations. So they're going to drive very, very rapid change. So I'm optimistic. I'm a promoter of social tipping points. That through if we can get 5-10% of people moving in a direction, you just create a tipping point, and then soon everybody starts moving in that direction. And so I do think it can happen very, very fast. I'm just hoping it happens fast enough so we avoid the tipping points.
This is why he doesn't cry at night. See, that's optimism. That's why he doesn't cry at night. Well, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Lovely. We've been really excited to talk to anyone who had any involvement in this book. So we're really, really thrilled that you took the time to speak with us.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. It's been fun.
At Global Partners for Development, our mission is to advance community-led initiatives that improve education and public health in East Africa. We envision a world in which every East African community has the capacity to implement dynamic, sustainable solutions to the challenges they face. To learn more, visit gpfd.org.